So Israeli soldiers severely gang raped a Gazan detainee at Sdei Teiman torture camp. This is something that was broadly reported even in Western media. The case was so extreme, the victim had to be hospitalized and the IDF had to detain 10 of the reservists. Okay? And yes, we're going to talk about John Oliver in a second and his segment. I want to watch the whole segment. If anyone has the link to the whole segment, I would love to watch it. Before we get to JD Vance and stuff. So, as you guys know, Sdei Teiman is a concentration camp. That's where Palestinians in Gaza are through a protocol known as Dragnet, where every and any Palestinian that they have declared to be a terrorist is picked up, first of all, humiliated, stripped down to their fucking underwear, and then and postured around as though they're like all terrorists or whatever, when without any evidence whatsoever. And then they put them in this concentration camp. Okay. It's gruesome. It's horrifying. It's something that some Israelis have actually protested as well. Israeli coverage on it has happened even before Western media covered it. We covered it when Local Call did an investigative piece on it. I believe it was Local Call, if I'm not mistaken. So then Western media even covered it, as a matter of fact. So this is a very real thing that happened. The New York Times covered it. CNN covered it. Okay. But the story doesn't end there. Okay. So they detained 10 reservists that were responsible for the brutal rape of a Palestinian prisoner. Israeli ministers then, including those in Benjamin Netanyahu's own Likud party, said that they should have a right to rape in Israeli parliament, in the Israeli Knesset. They got together and had a conversation about whether or not, and I know it sounds insane. I'm telling you right now, it sounds fucking insane when I say this, but it is 100% true. Okay? Here is Knesset member Ahmad Tibi from Ta'al saying to insert a stick to a person's rectum. Is that legitimate? And then a Likud, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party, a Likud Knesset member says, yes, if he is Nukba, everything is legitimate to do to him.
אני לא יודע אם יודעים, אבל יש אירוע כרגע בשדה תימן שמשטרה צבאית הגיעו לעצור חיילים ששמרו על מחבלי נוח'בה. והחיילים בשדה תימן, מתקן מעצר של מחבלי נוח'בה.
For the record, Nukba is like Hamas special forces. Having said that, however, they say Sdei Teiman is the Nukba terrorist detention center. This is not true either. Okay? Like, when they say that these are like the best like Hamas militants or whatever, one, it's still a war crime. Okay? You can't just like rape and you know, do torture to fucking you know, people, unless you're the American government, or I guess unless you're Israel, which does do those things. But yeah, here's time without an OVO. Thank you. Good thing to know before you start reading. 40% of Sdei Teiman detainees are re-released into Gaza after being held for weeks or months. When they say they are terrorists, know that many have nothing to do with Hamas. Also, yes, it was Yuval Abraham for Local Call and Hagar Shezaf for Haaretz back in January. We covered the story about Sdei Teiman in January when Local Call, which is a great Israeli investigative reporting magazine that broke so many of these stories that you've seen even circulate in Western media sometimes, cover Sdei Teiman and how barbaric it is, the conditions. The New York Times covered it months later, where we found out in detail how gruesome the conditions were. In June, the New York Times wrote this article. They obviously buried the fucking lead in terms of like using electric cattle prods to anally rape Palestinian detainees. You need to understand that. Okay? So just like there is a personalized aspect of the violence that they subject the Palestinian detainees to. Palestinian detainees that, once again, are re-released into Gaza, as in these guys aren't like the super terrorists that Israel claims that they are. Almost half of these Sdei Teiman detainees are re-released into Gaza. We have seen their personal testimony. We've heard their personal testimony. They are released in a gruesome situation where they talk about the psychopathic treatment that they received, just mass torture. Okay? It is a torture factory. It is a death camp. It is a concentration camp. That is exactly what's going on here. And the way that they try to package it is by saying, oh, these are Nukba, like these are the special forces of Hamas. Okay? They are not. That is also a lie.
נוח'בה, ומשטרה צבאית שם הגיעה לעצור כמה לוחמים שם שכנראה בגלל איזה שהם טענות של יחס למחבלי נוח'בה, ויש שם אירוע של הטרלול.
This insanity that our country is having around the story is crazy and we need to stop it.
ואני חושב שצריך פה לתת דוגמה
I
אישית.
think we need to give a personal example here, and I call on the other coalition members to do the same.
אני קם.
I'm getting up and I'm leaving here, and I'm not going to vote on anything anymore until this story and this insanity that there's someone in the prosecutor's office that thinks that it is possible to come and arrest soldiers for things that they're doing the Nakba terrorists is not over. Like, he's mad that prosecutors detained 10 Israeli soldiers at the concentration camp for brutally raping a Palestinian prisoner so badly that he had to be hospitalized. Okay? This guy is saying not the fucking brutal rape and torture is like unimaginable and unconscionable. He's saying the prosecution of the people that did the brutal rape is unconscionable. He's mad that like there's any accountability for the soldiers.
Okay?
And I'm really asking, and I think my coalition friends will do as well if they do the same as I do. We cannot continue as usual. And then the Tal Party Knesset member says to insert a stick in a person's rectum, is that legitimate? He says, shut up. Yes, if he's a nukba, everything is legitimate to do.
יש דברים שלא עושים.
Like, this is next level fash. Okay? Now, it doesn't end there. Okay? While this conversation is taking place, Israel's Knesset, currently on summer break, is holding an emergency discussion to defend the rapist IDF soldiers who were detained for gang raping a Gazan detainee. Israeli finance minister is calling the IDF rapist soldiers heroic warriors, demanding their immediate release. This is Bezalel Smotrich. He is a settler. He is incredibly fucking far right, even further right than Benjamin Netanyahu. The security minister is calling them our best heroes and calling their arrest shameful.
לצערי הרב, בשבועות האחרונים אנחנו שומעים על עוד ועוד מקרים שבהם לוחמי
Israeli journalists and public figures are also rushing and scrambling to defend the IDF gang rapists who severely assaulted a Gazan civilian, and the IDF had kidnapped to the Sdei Taman torture camp. There are wide calls for pro-rapist protests in Israel right now. So that was around 12 hours ago. And those wide calls for pro-rape protests, leave everything now and come protect our soldiers who are raping detainees. The Gazan gang rape victim was hospitalized with a serious wound in his rectum area. Israeli media is calling him a Nakba terrorist to cover it up, but every single detainee in Sdei Taman is a civilian, never charged or put on trial. Combatants are detained elsewhere. Israelis are now rushing. So then they rushed the Sdei Taman concentration camp for a mass protest. They're not there to demand the release of the unjustly kidnapped or systematically tortured/raped Gazan civilians. Those protesters are there to show the full solidarity to the IDF gang rapists. They did a pro-rape protest at the concentration camp. Like, this is like the Nazism that is leaking out of every orifice, okay, is just so insane. It is like comically evil, but it's not even comical. I don't even know how to describe it. Like, this is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. And I thought we had reached, like, peak insanity in Israel. Turns out, nope, there is more out there. There is more insanity that could be unlocked, new fresh hells that could be unlocked in this situation. The irony, of course, that these fucking inbred fucks don't understand is that the only reason why Israel is moving to actually detain some of the rapists, not all, but some of the rapists, is so they can actually stop the international organs of justice from adequately prosecuting Israel for their war crimes. Because you might be thinking, Hasan, what is going on? It seems like Israel never takes actions like this. And you'd be right, because Israel doesn't take actions like this normally. So why now? Especially without any additional coverage on this, with the exception of the articles that came out in June. That is because of a principle that the ICC upholds, okay, that normally is supposed to declare countries that have their own democratic process to not be prosecuted under the fucking International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. Okay? What is the term called? I'm forgetting now. Complementarity. Thank you, A-List 58. That is what it's called. It's called complementarity. Now, complementarity means that if the country itself is at least making an attempt to, and this is created to shelter Western countries from, ever being prosecuted in the ICC, and only keep the ICC's attention on, in the words of potentially Lindsey Graham, ICC's attention should be kept to African leaders and also thugs like Putin, right? African leaders, Serbians, thugs like Putin. Those are the triple Monty, okay? That's usually how this is supposed to work. As a matter of fact, we have additional evidence on the principle of complementarity. Complementarity, I hope everybody understands that, okay? Are you paying attention? Complementarity implies that if the country where these crimes are happening has its own actual criminal justice system and supposedly an interest in a democratic process and due process in general and prosecuting their own wrongdoers, then the ICC doesn't step in. But the ICC has stepped in, right? Karim Khan, the prosecutor, actually applied for arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Now, we know that Israel knows this process. Why do we know that? Because Local Call and The Guardian conducted an investigation that we reported on this broadcast, where they actually intercepted the communications, of the former prosecutor before Karim Khan that was besmirched by Israeli attempts and was surveilled round the clock. Israel intercepted her communications with Palestinians specifically so they could figure out exactly what she was looking into. Bensouda is her name, a Gambian woman. They intercepted her conversations with Palestinian authorities as she was conducting an investigation into Israeli war crimes, specifically so that they could start their own internal investigations on the wrongdoers inside of Israel so they could use complementarity as a defense mechanism. Okay? So they could say, oh, well, you want to prosecute us for war crimes? Well, we prosecuted those war crimes ourselves. So how can you do that? We obviously are on it. Not all of the Israeli war crimes were prosecuted, simply the ones that Bensouda was looking into in an effort to combat, in an effort to use complementarity as a shield. So remember that. So the reason why Israel even detained these rapist IDF soldiers is because they know that there is an ICC investigation being conducted as we speak. And if they don't actually detain or prosecute any of their soldiers, then the ICC can turn around and say, you're not actually prosecuting your own war criminals. We have to prosecute it for you. Okay? So these dumb fucks don't understand that what Israel was doing was out of self-preservation. They want to evade any kind of additional scrutiny from international organs of justice, which would blow the whole fucking case up and would, create another vector of pressure upon Israel, an apartheid state that is currently actively conducting a genocide. But anyway, they don't think like that. They're like, IDF soldiers were doing rape. That's awesome. So then they did their own fucking January 6th. So, but it doesn't end there. Okay, so I showed you the conversation that took place. Dozens of Israeli settlers then stormed the military headquarters in Beit Lid in support of the suspected soldiers from the Sdei Taimon torture facility who are being interrogated after a Palestinian Palestinian prisoner was assaulted and hospitalized. Some of the Israeli settlers apparently were fucking armed. When are you going to cover Venezuela? The regime is killing a bunch of people. Why you never cover leftist regimes in Latam when they do something wrong? Yeah, Maduro, the peak of leftism. There are paramilitary forces shooting at people in Venezuela. Why don't you cover Venezuela? That's really interesting because one, it's in the fucking title. Learn to read, dumb fuck. Okay. I will inevitably get to Venezuela. Two, suck my fucking dick. Okay. Like imagine we're talking about our greatest ally in the Middle East. Okay. And you're like, hey, why don't you stop talking about this apartheid regime that is actively doing a genocide? Okay. Or it's not in the title. Sorry. It's on my, it was on my blast off. It's not in the title because there's not enough space, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to fucking get in. I'm going to get to it. It was in my blast off tweet. There's broader political context here. Most Israelis blame Netanyahu for October 7, but what about his supporters? Well, among Bibis and Kahanas, the main narrative is that the traitors from inside theory, basically a shadowy leftist appointed legal and military elite, allowed the whole thing to happen to topple the government. Ministers of the Knesset rarely say it, but it's very common. It was a continuation of shit from the judicial coup, and fury at the military prosecutors happens in the same context too. Oh, that's awesome. They have their own deep state narrative. Of course they do. Why wouldn't they have their own deep state narrative? They're fucking hogs. So of course the Israeli hogs, the hog universality principle remains. It's always the same. The funniest thing is, like, who are they going to blame? The Jews? That's what we do in America. That's what our hogs do. Oh, dude. Our hogs are like, yeah, the deep state led by the Jews are doing this. And then what are the Israeli hogs doing? Other Jews? Like what? Here we say it's leftist. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. It's the leftist Jews, the bad Jews. That's what Ben Shapiro says too. So, oh my God. Okay. Hog universality, baby, is a real thing. Okay. It is global. It is real. It doesn't fucking matter. You can have an Islamist fundamentalist a government. You can have a Jewish supremacist fundamentalist government. You could have a Christian fascist fundamentalist government, and their supporters are always leaning in the direction of fascism, or just like are openly fascist, will always be like, ah, there's a deep state. There is a deep state. That's awesome. It's Hamas deep state. Read previous. The protest's over now, but I think the poetic beauty of this whole shit fest. Herzi Halevi said that these courts are the things that protect soldiers domestically and internationally. That is from The Hague. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a microcosm of Israeli politics, a battle between the old regime that wants to whitewash crimes de facto with performative gestures to the international courts, and the new regime that wants to whitewash them de jure, that is by legalizing them. Mask off, it's barbarism now. Yeah. Self-preservation, not only from the United States, but also from our self-preservation, not only from Israel, but also the United States. Here it is. Soldiers are resisting arrest. Lawmakers are rioting to say Israeli forces get to sexually abuse prisoners. In February, I asked the U.S. about Israeli forces parading women's underwear allegations of sexual abuse. They defer to Israel's professional military standards. This also looks bad for America as well. Okay? And America knows that it ruins Israel's what like remaining fraction of credibility that they had. They don't really have any, but they don't have to. This is what Leibowitz meant when he said in 1967, the occupation will take us from a proud and rising nationalism to a messianic radical nationalism. The third step will be barbarism. The last step will be the end of Zionism. There are extreme psychological steps one has to make to justify such horrific and frequent violence toward the outside. The longer it goes on, the more this logic extends inwards. This is the third step, barbarism, and it's the beginning of the end. Yeah, 100%. As I've said before, time and time again, since October 7, the inherent contradictions, but paired up with the arrogance and entitlement and bloodlust that is a never-ending self-justifying cycle that must continue in Israel for Israel to continue being an apartheid state, that makes the average Israeli person like this incredibly bloodless fascist, is going to inevitably cause Zionism to crumble. Opposition leader Yair Lapid says, "We are not at the brink of the abyss. We are in the abyss. All red lines were crossed today. Legislators and ministers who took part in the incursion of violent militias into military bases are telling the state of Israel they are done with democracy. They are done with the rule of law. A dangerous fascist group threatens the existence of the state of Israel. They are the best thing that happened to Sinwar and Nasrallah. If we don't stand up to them, the country will fall apart." So Yair Lapid also fucking famously said, if you remember, he's the centrist opposition, okay? He is the centrist opposition. Yair Lapid represents this old regime, says Time Without an OO. Yes, that's correct. Yair Lapid is the centrist opposition who literally, is that a W? No, because Yair Lapid is saying this while he simultaneously was also calling the ICC Hamas. Maybe he didn't go that far, but was like, this unacceptable. The ICC decision that would bring about justice to my major enemy, okay, my political rival, Benjamin Netanyahu, who I constantly talk about as though he's the spawn of fucking Satan. I am very mad. I'm very mad that the ICC is trying to prosecute him as a war criminal. It's like, how do you do that? It's like the Democratic Party members being like, Donald Trump is literally the second coming of Hitler, but also, I am very sad about what happened where he got shot at. It makes me so sad. Yeah. Bro, he did what Dems do when Trump got shot. Yeah, exactly. How does the U.S. maneuver around this, given their interest in the region? Isn't the disintegration of Israel counter the reason the U.S. government props them up in the first place? Where does this head for regional stability? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, this is like, they're just letting shit go completely out of control. According to Benzion Sanders, armed militias are claiming to have taken over military courts. The mob is trying to free soldiers who were arrested on suspicion of brutally sexual assault of Palestinian prisoners. Just normal stuff, dude. Real cool and real normal stuff. Also, is there any coverage of this? Is there any fucking coverage of this in Western media? I have seen such little coverage of this. Damn near not a single fucking, like, everyone is talking about Netanyahu vowing to retaliate against Hezbollah after a lethal weekend strike. No one is talking about what is going on in terms of like the pro-rape of detainees protests that are happening. Oh, meanwhile, here's some good news. Very big deal of follow through, says Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute. UK is expected to suspend arms sales to Israel. Officials say the decision is believed to be based on the ICJ opinion that Israel violates international law. I told you that. Like the ICJ decision was a big fucking deal because it complicates trade relations with Israel. It complicates any kind of like arms deal with Israel. Now, I don't know. New York Times today. Yeah, it's just not. It's not significant enough for the New York Times to cover the Israeli Knesset having a emergency meeting to talk about the wonderful benefits of allowing IDF soldiers to rape Palestinian detainees. Why would they cover that? Come on.